Nice to see you folks. I get excited because I'm from Puerto Rico.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Chicago, all right. Oh. Thank you all for joining us. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Please continue to put your organization and location in the chat. And if you think of another favorite TV show, documentary, movie, please share with the group. Welcome to the Peer Recovery Support Services 101 Peer Active Training, Basic Terms, Roles, and Responsibilities. This should be a really great, informative session led by our facilitators, Hanir Hernandez, a member of the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence Steering Committee, and also Sharon Hesseltine, also on the steering committee, and President and CEO of Intentional Development. We have some really great presenters. I'm guessing maybe some of you know them, and we're really looking forward to the content today. Welcome, Michelle from NAMI. Here's our disclaimer for SAMHSA's purposes. Thank you. So the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, welcome. The Peer Recovery Center of Excellence is based out of the University of Missouri at Kansas City. And the really important and special aspect about the center is that it's peer-led. So the peer voice is at the core of our work and guides our mission to make sure that the peer voice is really integrated in everything that we do. Our focus areas are integration of peer support services, capacity building for recovery community organizations, workforce development, and bridging the gap between evidence-based practice and practice-based evidence. So we really want to make sure that we, integrate everything from the research and also from lived experience. Next slide, please, Cindy. So within our underneath the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence is the Minority AIDS Initiative Supplement. So our Peer Recovery Center of Excellence is our umbrella, and the Minority AIDS Initiative Supplement is funded through SAMHSA, and it is specifically to provide training and technical assistance to Minority AIDS Initiative grantees. We really want to use this grant to empower, support, initialize a lot of the impacts that we can get on the ground through cultural humility, health equity, and reducing health disparities. And some of our purposes on this Minority AIDS Initiative Supplement are to solicit input from grantees and key stakeholders. Some of you may have heard from us asking about your feedback for our needs assessment, and the results will be coming out in the near future. And we have also incorporated some of those results already, some of the outcomes from the needs assessment in the activities that we're doing, this one included, provide proactive training and technical assistance, and respond to requests for customized TA from individual MAI grantees. Slide, please. We have plenty of resources and information. I won't go through everything here, but you will get this slide deck after this is over, and the links will be available to you. But please know that MAI grantees are welcome to submit a TA form for individual TA, to request individual TA. If you have any questions, we also have an FAQ, a resource library, and you can contact us at any time via this email. And we've got some really brief housekeeping before I turn it over. This presentation is being recorded. The recording will be made available in the coming weeks, and you will get that, I believe, via email. During the presentation, please submit your questions and feedback in the chat box. You will also have time to use your voices because we want to hear your voices. So, and this is designed to be very, very interactive. So please feel free to ask your questions as we have some real experts presenting today. So you don't want to miss out. Definitely take that opportunity. We love seeing your smiling faces. I see some of you. If you're able, please turn on your webcam. And please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. Like I said, we will have time for Q&A. And please raise your hand and we will ask you to unmute yourself. You will receive the slides for this presentation via email once we're complete. And we value your feedback. You will get an evaluation link via email at the end of the presentation. So please submit your responses within the next day or two. And at that, what I will do is turn this over to Sharon and Hanir. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Tanisha, and for the introduction and so on. As Tanisha said, I'm Sharon Heseltine. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. And I thought it would be nice if we start off today with a 5-minute video. So I'm going to give you a little background on the video and then let you know a couple of things that we'd like you to do and think about as you're watching the video. So I had the great honor of developing training curricula for peer support in Kentucky who work with folks with substance use disorder. And we started working on that curricula in late 2017. And in, I think, February 2018, we put together this video. And I say we, but really some really talented folks from Erie, Pennsylvania, did phenomenal video work for us. It was supported through the Kentucky Opioid Response Effort. And I've always been so grateful to them because every single thing that we have developed for them, they generously share with anybody who is interested in it. And I really love that they do that because I think that strengthens the work for all of us. So what you'll see in this video is folks who are in the role of peer support. By and large, there's a couple of administrators. You'll be able to tell who they are when you hear them and see them because of the perspective that they come from. But they're really talking about what this work means for them, for the peers, what it means for them, what they see, what they value. And what I'd like you to do as you watch the video is just try and think about what one word really rises up for you. I know folks have shared their organization in their role already, so please don't feel like you have to do that again. But I just encourage you and invite you to share your word in the chat as we get to the end of the video, and we can kind of take a look at what that really brings up for all of us. So I was almost going to try and advance the slides, Cindy, but I just remembered that you can that you're going to run that video for me. Okay, here we go.
My dad was a union iron worker, and I watched him wake up and drink beer every day.
I was living on the streets, basically living out of my car. I had 2 warrants out for my arrest.
Started with just a couple Lortabs here.
Oops.
Here and there. Made me feel like Superman, so I was like, well, I'm going to continue to do this.
He almost killed me. I lost my kids. I went through it all. I went to prison. I went to jail.
I've done IOP before. I've gone through drug court. I've been through all these things. I've even been to prison twice.
People got a lot of stories they don't tell all the time, and I wasn't telling anybody about some of mine for 20 years.
It's like fire inside your bones, man. It's burning inside and you can't extinguish it. Your head is sweating, your body's aching, you want to get away.
People are dying every week, and people are suffering.
The problems that we're having today are greater than they used to be. It's affecting every walk of life, every generation.
I had a problem and I didn't want to continue the way I was living.
The fear of dying of this disease wasn't what scared me. The fear of living through it is what terrified me the most.
You just don't know when the lights are going to go on and someone is going to say, yes, I want help today. And so peers really act as the connective tissue between treatment services, specialized treatment services, and the community of recovery.
Their job is to offer their own experiences to our clients.
My personal story, my education, my training, my life, is giving me the gift to be able to work with people on a level that peer support's able to do.
If you want to do peer support work, remember always that you were once just like the person you're talking to.
Here's someone who's been where you've been and is in this whole different place. And when you see that, it gives you a lot of hope.
My job doesn't feel like work. What it feels like is that I get to help people all day.
There's an emotional roller coaster that goes on during early recovery, and I want to help them to learn to cope with that.
Many peers come from lived experience, not necessarily very far from their own recovery. It's really important that they understand some of the do's and don'ts, if you will, in terms of what can be helpful and what can create harm.
As a peer support, I feel like it's my responsibility to maintain boundaries with the client, because the client does not understand what boundaries are.
You don't want to come off as too strong, or sometimes you may not want to be too relaxed. You just want to find the medium so you can let them know that, hey, I'm here for you.
Self-care is a big component in this line of work. I just know when I don't take care of myself, it's hard for me to help take care of somebody else.
If we fail, then the people that we're supposed to help won't succeed. And now we're dealing with life and death.
We know that the longer folks stay engaged in the treatment process, the more likely they are to be able to find long-term recovery.
This is how a peer support specialist helps somebody else, by having that lived experience and sharing that with a client.
Once I got sober and started working the steps and started doing certain things, I enjoyed it.
So when I got it, I just wanted to give it to everybody else. It's like, hey man, you ain't got to go through this again, man. You got it.
One of my good days is when one of the clients says, hey, I got a sponsor, or hey, I went to a meeting by myself.
Find out what it is they want. What is recovery to you? What is where do you see yourself in a year? What can we do to get you to that point? What will make you happy? Because essentially that's all I want to do, is improve somebody's quality of life.
Sometimes we're not strong enough to fight for ourselves, and it's just somebody having faith in us until we have faith in ourselves. I want to fight for them.
So if you want to go ahead and think about kind of what comes up for you as you watch that, and go ahead and put that into the chat. Thanks, Regina. I love what you put in here during the video, Barbara, as well, about being relatable and sharing a part of ourselves, and really, being equal with folks. Lots of folks saying hope, community. Anything else? I know there's a bunch of y'all here, right? So, right, tears and empathy, vulnerability, right? Meeting folks where they are. That's such a key piece of this work. Brittany, I love that opportunity to live two lives in one lifetime. I so often will refer to recovery as the great do-over. And I didn't say a lot in the way of introduction around myself. I am a woman in long-term recovery. And I always feel like I'm so fortunate that I got this opportunity for a massive do-over in my life at the age of 45, and get to start again. And so I think that is always amazing, right? Connection, focusing on the whole person, not just the issue. Self-advocacy, connection, self-care, valuable, humility. This is awesome. And when we think about the work of peer support, if I look at all the things that y'all put into the chat and I think about that, right, collectively, that is what so much of this work is about. There's things about the video, and I was sharing it with my co-presenter, Hanir, yesterday. I said, there's things about this video that I really love, and I love the spirit of the work of peers that really comes through in this video. And then there's other things about it that I think about, wow, we've grown a lot since 2018 in the work. I've been just really blessed to know the folks who are in that video and have continued to stay connected with them over the course of time because they live in the same community that I live in. And so we stay connected. So I get to see how we've changed, how our work has changed, how we have really come from where we were in my state in 2018 to where we really embrace multiple pathways to recovery in a way that we were just learning how to do in 2018. And then the other thing that always stands out to me is, as I listen to folks, including myself, right, talk about the work. In the video, we talk a lot about, right, lived experience, sharing your lived experience and supporting folks, which is key piece of what we do. But I think that there's so much more about the work of peers and what does that really look like? What does sharing your lived experience look like? When do you do that? Because it's so much more, as you all know, and I can tell from what you've put in the chat, it's so much more than telling your story, right? So when we look at just the basics of what are peer recovery support services, and we see what's on the slide here, we're really thinking about both giving and then the receiving. This is a reciprocal relationship, and I am a huge advocate of relationship-based work and how at the core of so much of what we do, relationships are really the catalyst for change. And so this is about, right, relationship, non-clinical assistance that supports long-term recovery from substance use disorders and in other situations of mental health diagnosis as well. We think about how we bring our lived experience of recovery, but combine that, right, with training and what we hope is, right, quality and engaged supervision. And when I think about the work of peers, I think about the continuum of care, and then really integrated with stages of change. We're thinking about how do we support folks across that early engagement, right? Or pre-contemplation and contemplation stage where folks maybe aren't even thinking that substances are an issue for them or that recovery is something they'd be interested in pursuing. And I think about peers at the part of the continuum that really is around treatment, right? Recovery initiation and stabilization from active addiction, and then the support moving further into that continuum around maintaining recovery. I had the opportunity not too long ago to listen to this wonderful podcast, and I'll make a note so I can put it in the chat. When Hanir is speaking, I can never talk and type simultaneously, but it was called Flourishing After Addiction, and John Kelly was actually the guest on the podcast. And one of the things that so stood out that he talked about was that it really is about 5 years of continuous recovery before your risk of being in reactivation of this disease really drops to the same level as the general population, which is roughly around 10 to 15%. So when you think about, right, the work of peers is so crucial into that, right, support around longer term recovery. When I think, in many places and oftentimes depending on funding mechanisms and so on, the work of peers gets narrowly focused within that treatment episode. And while that's beneficial, it's certainly not sufficient to help folks maintain long-term recovery. I think the other piece that becomes so critical is how, as peers, do we support folks in growing their recovery capital, right? Those internal and external resources that help folks both engage in and maintain long-term recovery. So we know that as folks grow recovery capital, that really strengthens and solidifies and increases opportunities towards long-term recovery. So it's an ideal role for peers to support folks and growing the recovery capital in a way that's person-centered, that's really based on the capital that the person is really interested and excited about growing at whatever stage of this process they're in. So Cindy, if you could go to the next slide for me. So what does peer support look like? I think in everything that I've read and studied, and I'm guessing for all of you who are peers who've taken any kind of a certification test as a part of getting your peer support in your state. Whoops, thank you. This is probably some of the pieces of information that you may find right on that test or that we talk about. And part of how I really look at these 4 things, emotion, affiliation, information, and instrument, is really around no matter what function you're engaged in within your work as a peer support, it's going to fall into one of these 4 buckets. Whether you're providing emotional support, really using your lived experience. I think one of the ways that we have such an opportunity with our lived experience is to help to kind of normalize, right? As I think in the video, is my friend Stan, who says early recovery is an emotional roller coaster. But so often in that place, you're just absolutely convinced that what you're feeling is totally weird, right? From anybody else. So we can, as peers, really use our lived experience to help normalize that emotional roller coaster, offer that emotional type of support. We look at affiliation and the support that kind of falls under that bucket. It's about helping folks to really get connected, to build some of those new kind of skills socially, recreationally, how to gain that sense of belonging. And that really is a very close tie with growing social recovery capital, where we build relationships with people in recovery, rebuild relationships with family, feel a part of. And I think about, as I was working on some of the training that I did here in Kentucky, there was a quote from Bill White in his book, Recovery Rising, where he talks about what substances do for people, right? Before they take it all away, before the crash and burn. And for so many of us, that doing for dimension is about how substances gave us a sense of belonging or a sense of connection. My own experience is that that's a big piece of what they did for me, but it was also kind of a false sense of connection and belonging. And ultimately, everything they did for me, they took those exact same, substances took all those same things away as my addiction progressed from mild to moderate, right, to severe. So you think about helping folks really grow a life that in recovery is rich, that is full of connection and full of relationship. And how I always like to look at it is how, as peers, we help folks build a life that they wouldn't want to lose, right? That they wouldn't want to lose. That feeds, I think it feeds your soul, right? In a meaningful way. So, right, affiliation is a really powerful way of approaching that and helping folks build those connections and support folks through those opportunities. We also provide information, right? Knowledge, whether that's through our own lived experience or through training, through maybe curriculum that we may be using. How are we providing folks, right, information? And even where we might be providing instruction. I know that in the state that I live in, and particularly for the peers that I have worked with who are really connected at a residential level of care, connected with treatment at the residential level of care or an intensive outpatient, many of those folks are also providing and facilitating a lot of groups. And as we're looking here in this work today through the Minority AIDS Initiative, we're also thinking then there's those health-related topics that are really key to the support that peers are providing in this arena. And then we look at that instrument support, concrete assistance, helping folks get services that they need. Oftentimes that falls in the bucket of physical recovery capital, whether that's healthcare, a way of payment for healthcare, right, transportation, housing, the things that help bring stability to our lives and really help us right, reduce our stress level. One of the things I think I want to tap into in this last piece here around transportation is that, transportation becomes an interesting piece because it is not necessarily the role of peer to be the main transportation provider in an organization. I think in many of our organizations, everybody probably provides transportation every now and again. And peers shouldn't necessarily be in the main transportation provider role. I see where we're providing transportation. Sometimes it's within, right in that affiliation sense that we're helping folks get connected and providing support and accompanying folks to whether that's recovery activities in the community or supporting folks in being able to access services. But we want to think about if, as a peer in your organization, they're the main provider of transportation, then it's important to kind of step back from that and take a look at that function and whether it's really being overused. We can go to the next slide. So some concrete activities peers may be involved in, right? Advocacy for folks in recovery, and that happens at a lot of different levels. That happens at the level within the organization sometimes, where as peers, we are the voice of folks who are being served when they're not in the room, right? So the advocacy function within our organization, we're advocating for folks in being able to access services that they're needing, and we're advocating at a community level, and for many of us, right, even at a state or a federal level for people in recovery, and looking at how we also, right, help to, right, reduce stigma in our communities. Peers may be sharing resources, building skills, as we've been talking about, building community, leading groups, whether that's recovery groups, education groups, depending on the organization. I know in my community in Louisville, Kentucky, we have a recovery community organization, and we have peers involved there who lead all recovery meetings and lead our evenings that are focused on art and music and open mic nights and all kinds of other things that peers are leading in our community. And then we talked already about building recovery capital through mentoring and recovery planning. I think that process of recovery planning is really one that can be incredibly powerful and incredibly empowering as folks really get to experience what it feels like to identify something that you'd like to have look different in your life and then successfully move forward towards that change. Can we go to the next slide, please? So you see here a list of the different functions of peer support staff. And this list comes from the peer support toolkit that was developed by Achara Consulting in the city of Philadelphia. And it's available online. I'll go ahead and get the link in there in the chat for you all here in just a few moments. But there's some really, it's just that tool. I can't say enough great stuff about that particular toolkit. So that's where this list of functions comes from. And then what I want to do is, I think Cindy had put into the chat a link where you can actually download a handout that describes these functions in a little bit more detail. And I don't know, Cindy, you're reading my mind, which happens on a regular basis. Thank you so much. So y'all could download that, because I want to see if you have an opportunity to take a look at it. And Cindy's going to put that up here. And I don't know, Cindy, if in here you're able to do where it shows both pages. So that'll probably
not sure, but it is in the chat. So it's hard to see while I'm scrolling all over.
Yeah. So as you're taking a look at that, take a look at those functions on that handout, and maybe, okay, I was going to try and share it off from my computer because I have a side-by-side view, but it isn't letting me do that. As Ken is asking, can we zoom in just a bit? Yes. So as you look at those, for those of you who've been able to download it, what I want to ask you to do is take a minute. Let's just take a minute and take a look at some of these kinds of functions. And if you could either put into the chat, what are either, you got a choice here. Some of the functions that you feel that your organization is really strong in, that you got a lot of experience in these functions. And then maybe even if there's a function that you see here that you're like, oh man, like we're not doing that. I really wish that we were. Somebody can share with us what your organizations are doing in the way of functions, and then maybe something that you'd really like to. Emily is giving us TA here. Thank you, Emily. Click the view button on the top, and then there is a 2-page options, she says.
Okay, view button, sorry. View, there we go.
And it may look different. Oh, there it is.
But I know people wanted me to zoom in as well.
Yeah, you might try with the plus just a little bit. That's hard to see, but y'all download. This is like an awesome handout.
And I'll make sure I send it in the follow-up email just in case you're not able to download it here now.
I've used this a lot with our peer trainings, but also a lot with supervisor trainings, and it's been super helpful for organizations in looking at whether peers are new to an organization or organizations are looking at expanding the peer role. This gives such a comprehensive idea of what the core functions are for peers. So, and folks are asking about the links in a follow-up email as well. Are there any functions that folks see here that you feel your organization has really had lots and lots of experience around? That's one of what I call it a distinctive competency. Advocacy, empowerment, and health system navigation. So from Recovery Cafe. Need more outreach, right? So, and this is, I think, one of those opportunities, right, where we get to learn a little bit from each other. So, right, we see the Recovery Cafe is looking at, right, needing more outreach. Is there anybody here who really spends a lot of time in outreach that might want to just share for a minute about how that looks in your organization and the success that you've had with that function? Yeah, Adonis, thank you for raising your hand.
You're welcome. Yes, they use the function, so I'm gonna use the function. I am a peer intern here in New York for the Alliance for Positive Change. So a part of my responsibility is to do outreach. And I try to meet my youth or young adults exactly where they're at. So personally, I'm gonna keep on the eye. I go where they're at, social media. That's where they're at. That's where I know I can get them. So I'm involved with a lot of different Facebook groups, Instagram groups. Right now, my team and I are coming up with a special Facebook or social media page for our location where we can draw people more so into our organization instead of just being out in the rain, passing out condoms or with our Captain Condom costumes or whatever, going outside. So we're meeting them exactly where they're at, especially after the pandemic. That's where everyone seems to be at, is online. So yeah, it's been quite a hit and miss, but it's getting better.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, I've been around like forever, which makes me old, and I don't always think about outreach using social media as the location of where we're going to be doing outreach. So thank you so much. That's really awesome. That's just a great idea. And I'm hoping that that's something that resonates with other folks as well. So Hannah's saying both a great job of internal workforce development, training, and community awareness, working with local police. Hannah, do you want to say just a little bit more about that? And then we'll go ahead and move forward.
I was trying to get away with just doing it in chat because I get shy with this many people, but we have a project real quick working with the local police. It's called Project Care. So if there's something going on where we don't really need the police involvement, but they feel like they need to, the outreach coaches will ask them to stand back so that they can handle the situation, so that they can develop the relationship, and have had amazing success with that. That also includes, I know all of the states are experiencing pandemic homelessness, and lots of our folks are in not very nice hotels with no services. So they go and spend time with them there, bring meetings. And then we just got some money to have them be able to go to local farms and get good, organic, healthy food. So we're excited about that.
That's great. Thanks so much, Hannah. And then Patrick, I'm going to take your comment as the last one and then move forward because I'm taking more time than I anticipated.
Greetings all. My name is Patrick Dan. I work with Recovery Consultants of Atlanta, Georgia. We do assertive outreach. Like we provide free HIV, STD screenings out in the community daily. We also have collaborations with local detox facilities where if someone's ready for detox, we get them in. Someone becomes reactive or positive to HIV, hepatitis, syphilis, we link them to care. We have a federally qualified health center whose target population is the homeless individuals, so we meet their needs right where they are.
That's fantastic. What a great combination, right, of different functions that we're seeing from the handout. Thanks for sharing that, Patrick. So appreciate it. Cindy, we can go ahead and go back to the slides and to the next slide. Yep. Go to the next header, which will be go one more slide. Because what I'd like to do is turn this over at this point right to my colleague, Hanir. I think Patrick gave us a great segue right into really kind of looking, right, narrowing our lens now, right, to the work of peer support with folks with HIV/AIDS. So doing outreach and support in that way. And Hanir, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sharon, and to everyone else who's been saying in the chat what you do, your approach, and all the work that you're doing on the ground. Again, my name is Hanir Hernandez. I've worked in the field health and human services for the last 34 plus years. And I did a lot of work in HIV/AIDS in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. I live in Massachusetts. And so I participated in developing the first peer education program around HIV/AIDS in the 80s for Latino youth in the New England region. So I'm familiar with doing outreach, providing peer support, supervising peer support services for people living with HIV and their families. And I'm excited to be here today. I'm also a person in long-term recovery, which for me means I haven't used a drug, including a substance, for the last 35 plus years. So a year into my recovery process, someone offered me the opportunity to work in our field. And I became very excited and very scared at the same time because I didn't know why they were selecting me and I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. But here I am 35 years later, still learning from people like you doing this work across the country. So very grateful to be here. Next slide, please. Want to give us a little bit of history here, right, regarding the peer workforce, both in substance use disorders and HIV, right? And so the field of substance use disorders was developed by people in recovery. No one wanted to deal with issues of substance and people using alcohol and all of that. So people in need or in recovery at the time came together. Currently, so that meant that 100% of the workforce were peers, people with lived experience. Fast forward to today, about 30 to 40% are people in recovery. That is significant for many different reasons. For a very long time in the field of substance use disorders, we moved away from the use of peers and the value of peers to the work with the development of credentials, requirements for reimbursement, all of that stuff. It doesn't mean that people in recovery were not in the field, but when we got very clinical in terms of the work, that muscled out people in recovery for many different reasons. We're now coming back to embracing peers and hiring peers in our field, which is a really good thing. And then since the beginning of HIV, since the beginning of AIDS, peers have been involved in developing programming, delivering programming for people living with HIV in their families. I remember doing that work when there were no medications and our people were dying left and right? And so I remember the times of hospice care, right? Where what we could do is be with people, right? And you know, the enormous stuff that we learned from that by way of peer work, HIV buddies, just a whole bunch of people coming together and providing support. And the majority of them being people living with HIV and AIDS. That was a huge learning that we did. And I think that the folks working in prevention and HIV care embraced what we had learned about peer work and put that into practice. Next slide, please. And so I want to continue by asking you this question, right? In the chat, can you please share one strength that you think that peers bring into the workforce and in building relationships with their peers? Give us one strength that you think that peers bring into this process, right? We know that there are many. For me, it has been life-saving, right? They get it, lived experience, hope, no stigma lens, an understanding of where people are at. I'm assuming that's all about that. Forming trust without judgment, resiliency, compassion. We bring a sense of hope and the affinity of lived experience, empathy, honesty and hope, integrity of experience, all of those things, no telling people what to do. All of those things are extremely important. Thank you for all of you who've chimed in terms of what peers bring. That is a short list, right, of everything that we know that peers bring into the workforce, to systems, as well as in building those relationships and sustaining those relationships all the time. Peers focus on strengths and not deficits. What's right with you, not what's wrong with you. Thank you for that very much, Ruth. I worked with a Catholic nun, and we did a lot of training together, Sister Mary. And one person asked us in the crowd, how can I get better at detecting when people are lying? And it was the substance use disorder work that forever has been, for a very long time, has been focused on a deficit model. And Sister Mary turned around and said, you don't need training on catching people lying. You need training on catching people doing the right thing. And when you catch people doing the right thing and you build on that, people get better. People are tired of us bringing them down and pointing out things that are obvious, that are hurtful, right? That sort of thing. And my take on that is we have taken on jobs that say that we understand people living with HIV, that we understand people with substance use disorders. And so if we understand that, that comes with a lot of attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. And we should never be penalizing, kicking people out of care, treating people badly because they are exhibiting signs and symptoms of their disease or signs and symptoms of values that they have grown up with because of substance use, because of incarceration and those sorts of things. So thank you for doing all of that. Can you go to the next slide, Cindy? And thank you very much for assistance with the slides. Here are some similarities and differences, right? I know that a lot is made about differences. And so I ask you for a little bit of forgiveness regarding the busyness of the slide. But in terms of similarities, funding and silos, right? Many times, you know, we live in these silos and funding perpetuates silos. The whole idea of lived experience is something that we have in common and that we use in many different ways. The focus on wellness, some people might not call it wellness, but that's what we focus on, right? Helping people to decide what they want to do to get better, right? A central role in program planning and implementation. Peers should be playing, have been playing a central role in how we do that. And organizations need to involve peers in that process. And it should not be short of this participation that is minimal or token participation. It should be a central role in that process. Many of you have spoken about outreach, right? And how we do outreach. I remember again in HIV, we were doing outreach in bodegas, right? And corner stores. We're doing outreach in beauty parlors, in barber shops, in spaces and places where our folk congregate, right? And today we're talking about, social media and those spaces and places. We're also doing outreach in bars, right? In gay bars, in all sorts of spaces and places that are outside of the norm when people think about outreach. But we knew that in order to engage people, in order to meet people and educate people and engage them with our organizations, we needed to be out in the community. Yet many times we still have this model of you come to me, you make an appointment, you come to my space and place, you sit in the waiting area, you behave, you turn off that phone, you tell your kids not to make noise, right? All of those things. And then we say, oh, we meet them where they're at. No, we don't. We want them to meet us where we're at, with our rules, with our functions, right? So outreach needs to be that space and place where you're talking about that's guided by a practice that works. All right. Healthcare access, we work on that, right? For folks who don't have healthcare access or primary care access, those sorts of things. We focus on engagement and retention, right? How do we do that? By building relationships. We focus on prevention and harm reduction. And I must say this out loud. When the folks from the substance use disorder world haven't been the ones initially to embrace harm reduction. Those are folks doing prevention work, doing HIV work, all of that stuff. I remember when it wasn't syringe access or needle exchange, it was needle distribution. And the people who were doing that were working on HIV/AIDS prevention, and they were being locked up for that very focus on harm reduction, right? And many people from the substance use disorder world would have difficulty. Oh, you're condoning substance use, all of that stuff. Today, we're engaged in a conversation on harm reduction and prevention and what that means, right? Understanding co-occurring conditions. We know that many of our folk who live with HIV got infected through sex or they got infected through injection drug use, right? The sharing of needles, and that many of us live with co-occurring conditions, right? And so we need to understand that. We believe that peers do that as well. We facilitate connections to systems of care, right? At the community level, in many different spaces and places. We do MAT/MAR in the substance use disorder world, and we do medication adherence in the HIV world, right? In terms of education, all of that stuff. We do advocacy and referrals. And with advocacy here, I mean 2 levels of advocacy. Lowercase advocacy that I do on behalf of the people who are in front of me, that need access, that need engagement, that need all of that quality of care. Uppercase advocacy is the advocacy that I do, that we do on behalf of systems change. And that is really important for us to do. And in the HIV world, we have seen how that has transformed how we approach the work and how we do things, right? I always acknowledge the work of ACT UP. And at the time, many people believed that ACT UP was like this arm of the movement that, was out there and pushing things and all of that stuff and a lot of people didn't affiliate or understand. Today, I understand that ACT UP did a great job in terms of advocating for the pieces that we need. And peers were central to that advocacy and still are, right? We see differences here by way of funding and silos. Those are similarities and differences, right? Disease specific. And this is too bad because our folk all of us are holistic beings, right? But many times we focus on one thing, and we live in a society that's all about medications, and medications are important, but not for everybody. Not everyone chooses them, and there are differences here, right? Experiences with stigma and trauma. So when we think about HIV, we think about stigma, it's about discrimination. And many of that discrimination was grounded in injection drug use and people who use drugs, but also in homophobia, transphobia, right? And all of those discriminatory practices that exist to today, but I like to believe not to the extent as in in the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, that sort of thing. And then the traumatic experiences that people have had. Many of these things are similar, but some of them are very specific, right, to people's experience and cultural backgrounds. Substance use disorder recovery, right, in terms of differences. Some spaces and places understand this really well. Some don't. In terms of training, there are differences, how we do training, what we train people on. The credentials, right? In the substance use disorder world, there's emphasis on becoming certified or licensed as a peer specialist, a peer recovery coach, that sort of thing. In HIV, there has been some emphasis on credentialing, but not as much as in our field. And then criminal justice responses, right? In this country, we have done a real number on individuals, particularly with substance use disorders. We have criminalized mental health and substance use disorders to the tune of 2.3 million people incarcerated, the largest prison population per capita in the world. And so we see that continuation of many of those policies to this day. And so I love what you're saying in the chat. Thank you for all of those great things that you're saying there. Keep them coming. I'm going to go through some additional slides rather quickly so that we can get some interaction at the end. In terms of intersections, collaborations, and opportunities, I think that, you know, we have a lot of opportunities here, right? In terms of this focus on equity, right? That we know we need to have, with a focus on systems, very specifically, moving away from individualized punitive approaches, as many of you talked about earlier, for, you know, doing funding proposals that are collaborative, right? And having formal collaborations. And I know that many of you have collaborations on the ground right now. We believe that we need to move towards more formal collaborations, because I have collaborations with Adam or Sharon, you know, that sort of thing. Is if those things are not formalized, when I leave, Adam leaves, there goes the collaboration, right? So we need to institutionalize collaborations. We need to continue to lead with holistic approaches, right? Our folk just don't have one thing that they're dealing with. They have many things, and we can't be all things to all people. We need to be holistic in how we understand these issues, in our approach, in our collaborations. We need to be holistic all the way around. There's opportunities for doing co-training, right? Some institutions are doing great jobs of that, but some of us are still in our own silos, right? And we need to learn more about these things. Mentoring, supervision, and supports those are areas that we can do a lot more of collaboration on, because the peers who work in HIV and the peers who work in substance use disorders have a lot of the same needs and wants. And because they're non-clinical roles, there's a lot that we can learn from each other there. And then the ethics and boundaries look different from clinical settings and people who practice in clinical ways, right? And so what are those? What do they look like? How do we share in our learning and knowledge? And how do we continue to support each other? And again, nothing changes without advocacy. And for me, advocacy has to be grounded in social justice. There is no other way, because there's such a thing as discrimination, racism, and other forms of oppression. And if we don't ground it in equity, then what are we doing, right? What are we doing? That for me is a really important value. Can we go to the next slide, Cindy? So part of what we need to talk about is not reducing disparities, is eliminating disparities. That is the goal, to eliminate disparities, to build equity, and look for and participate in opportunities to impact changes at the individual level, at the family level, at the community level, at the society level, in other words, at all levels, right? And so culture is central to what we do. Everyone here has different aspects of culture that we identify with, right? At the individual level, again, at the family level, at the community level, at the society level. And so our approaches need to be grounded in not cultural competence. Cultural competence is an arrogant way of looking at things in terms of saying, I know everything there is to know about culture, but in cultural intelligence. And the most intelligent people that I met in my lifetime, they know this: I don't know everything there is to know. When we come at it from that perspective of, I know some things, but I know I don't know everything there is to know, then I'm coming at it from a strength-based perspective, from this perspective of I am forever learning. And that's been my experience, right? I learn every day, like I learned from you today in terms of the work that you're doing on the ground. Next slide, please. And so in order to lead with equity, we need to first understand what disparities are. And we know that you know that there are disparities in our fields, right? And so in terms of how Healthy People 2020 defines disparities, so racial, ethnic, or behavioral health outcomes that is seen to a greater or lesser extent between populations, right? Really straightforward sentence. We see outcomes that are different depending on what people look like, what they practice, right? Those sorts of things. And we know that these are particularly linked with socioeconomic and or environmental disadvantage. And so there's a lot to be said there. When we look at our field in terms of examples of disparities in substance use disorders, all in the news, all pushing for a greater understanding of the impact of opioids, right? Last year, over 100,000 people died of opioid overdoses. And for those of you in the room, and I am assuming that most of you have been touched by this, right? Because I have. I lost count, right? In terms of family members, friends who've passed away from opioid overdoses. And so we see disparities in that data, right? It's not that it's impacting everybody the same way. As a matter of fact, we need to acknowledge that people of color have been dying for decades and decades and decades without attention. We have gotten prison, jails, punitive approaches. As soon as white, young, affluent kids start to die, and they should not be dying, then we come up with a declaration of an emergency grounded in public health. But still the disparities persist. Then when we look at HIV/AIDS, you work in the Minority AIDS Initiative. You know what the data looks like, right? You know that when we talk about HIV infection rates, they impact disproportionately certain subgroups as opposed to others. And our work needs to be grounded in the understanding that disparities exist and that we need to design programs that are meant to eliminate disparities with an understanding of equity grounded in issues of social justice. My next slide here is going to show you a depiction that hopefully many of you have seen, right? This depiction of equity. And to the far left of the screen, you see equality. 3 people, 3 different heights, trying to watch over the fence to watch the ball game. They each begin with the same box. The smallest person there cannot see over the fence. And I ask the question regularly in these presentations, do you think equality exists? And the majority of people who have had experience with discrimination in many different forms say, no, it doesn't, Hanit. No, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, not everyone starts with the same box. So there, we're off kilter. But some people do think that equality exists. And these are the folks who go around saying, if I did it, anybody can do it. I have a PhD, but I also have a GED, and my GED I got in prison. Yet I don't go around saying that anyone who's coming out of prison can get a PhD if they want to, because the system is not set up so that everyone can have access. You see, I'm realistic. I believe that people can, but the system works against people. And we need to understand this as a systemic issue, not just as an individual thing, because if I go around saying, if I did it, anyone can do it. That's really arrogant, because when we look at reality, and by the way, equality exists only in the minds of people with power and privilege. Equality only exists in the minds of people with power and privilege. When we go to the far right, what do we see? That the smallest person is now in a ditch, right? And so think about that. Some people are relegated to that ditch before they're born. And when we go around saying, if you just work hard enough, you're going to be able to rise above and become whatever you want to be. Slow your roll once again, right? Because I know people who have 3 and 4 jobs. They work harder than I do, and they will never make in a week, what I make in a day. Hard work is important, don't get me wrong. Work ethic is important, But these are the folks who go around saying, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. All we need is personal responsibility. All of that nonsense. If it was hard work alone, every single female in Africa, Asia, Latin America would be a multi-billionaire in terms of hard work if it was up to that alone, right? So when we look at the person in the middle, what did they get? They get the same box to be able to, only to be able to watch over that fence, right? Nothing else. And then the person who didn't need one box to begin with now has 7 boxes. And when we look at an image like that, we usually think about the billionaire and the millionaire class. I am here to say that all of us in this training, all of us in this meeting have several boxes. I am male, I have a PhD, I have a home, I have family, I have community, I have transportation, I have a job. How many boxes do I have? And so for me, the look is inward. Where's my privilege? Where's the stuff that I hold? And how can I better use that to help people in need, to help support people in need? And there are people in the billionaire class that the majority are out for themselves, but there are also people who are out to share in resources with other folk. This reality is on the ground. I know that you see it from Kansas City to Chicago to LA to wherever it is that you're practicing, right? Then I take you to the middle where it says equity, right? The boxes are distributed differently. Hands up in the air, fists up in the air, people can watch the game. And I usually ask people, do you think that this is equity? Do you think that this is equity? And by and large, in the places and spaces where I go, people say, yes, that's equity. And I go, I disagree with you. That is not equity. Place yourself in the bleachers for a moment and look towards the fence. What do you see? You see 3 faces, 3 heads, not complete individuals. You see these 3 individuals marginalized outside of the fence. So the problem here is not necessarily the boxes. The perception is boxes. The problem here is the fence. We need to work on tearing down the fence. And the fence represents what? Policies, procedures, practices that keep people outside of participating fully. Because if you ask these 3 individuals, how do they want to be treated? Where do they want to see the game from? They would say, I want the right to sit in the ballpark with dignity and respect, and to pay the $15 for the stinky hot dog, $150 for the beer, but I want to be sitting inside. I don't want to be singled out, you see? And so it's a different perspective in terms of what the problem is. And for a very long time, we have focused on individuals. Again, that punitive pointing of fingers that my mom used to tell me, Haner, when you point a finger at someone else, there's 3 fingers pointing back. Look at yourself. And through education, I have learned that we need to continue to do uppercase advocacy and systems work, right? And systems work. Next slide, please. And so our approach needs to be grounded in what? In cultural humility. Again, this whole idea of cultural competence, that was a thing of the 90s. And it didn't work because people went to training, came out and said, I know everything there is to know about being Puerto Rican. And I am Puerto Rican and I don't know everything there is to know about being Puerto Rican, right? I don't know everything there is to know about my own family, never mind yours, right? And so it's a lifelong commitment to what? To self-evaluation and self-critique. What do I bring? Where are my biases? Where are my judgments, right? Where are my shortcomings? And how do I redress power imbalances? For a very long time as a person in recovery, I used to tell people that I saw coming through the door, I'm exactly like you. I did drugs too. I went to prison. I did all of that. I'm exactly like you. And a really good mentor of mine told me, Anel, you're full of crap. I said, why? I was taken aback. He said, you haven't done drugs in over 30 years. You have a car, you have a home, you have money, you have a retirement account, you have transportation, you have recovery capital, you have all of that stuff. When someone you see who is at their most vulnerable and you say, I'm exactly like you, what do you think that they're experiencing in that moment? I believe in utilizing lived experience, but I believe in utilizing it very carefully, you see? Because in the approach, we can be arrogant or we can be humble, right? And we're not the same because I have a title and I do have a salary. And this person is at the mercy of what I do in my approach. And so it needs to be grounded in cultural humility and not in, I'm here to save people's lives. I don't save anybody's lives, and no one saved my life. People put information, resources, support in front of me, and that has carried me, and it continues to carry me. But I don't, because that approach of I save people's life comes with a level of arrogance. I believe in walking beside people and learning from them. So our approach needs to be mutually beneficial. Janer Hernandez Bonilla can sit in front of you today and present because the people who supported me and continue to support me taught me how to do things. They didn't do for me. They taught me how to do it, mutually beneficial. Advocacy partnerships. I know advocacy because someone taught me. And it takes a little bit more time in terms of this peer work that we do, but it is more substantial and beneficial when we teach people what we do and how we do it. And I have yet to meet peers who have struggled with a very difficult area, whether that be HIV, whether that be substance use or mental health issues. I have yet to meet any of them who, as soon as they start to get better, they say, what? I want to give back. I want to help other people. And so how do we engage? How do we continue to engage people in these processes, right? We have to have a commitment to that. And that needs to be grounded in cultural humility, as opposed to, I'm here, I know, I have all of the resources. And if you follow exactly what I do and do exactly what I do, you're going to be well. I mean, come on. There's something that we know called the multiple pathways of recovery. And it goes like this. Does harm reduction work? Yes. Is harm reduction for everybody? Yes. 12-step, does it work? Yes. Is it for everybody? No. Faith-based, does it work? Is it for everybody? No. Rational recovery, smart recovery, celebrate recovery, do those pathways work? Of course they work. Are they for everybody? No. Medication-assisted treatment or recovery, does it work? Yes. Is it for everybody? No. Right? And so it's not my way. It's putting a menu of options in front of people and having them select what works best for them, as opposed to telling people what to do, how to do it, that sort of thing. That comes from a place of arrogance. And so, again, grounded in cultural humility, the group of peers is built for that, right? Because we know that we have had many different experiences. And even if we walk through the same door, we know that that experience was slightly different for all of us. Next slide, please. I would say that cultural context and considerations are extremely important, right? We need to acknowledge the role of racism, homophobia, ageism, sexism, and every other form of oppression that there is. And in many spaces and places, it's like this now, we're not going to talk about that again. We're not even going to acknowledge what has traumatized you, right? And these forms of oppression do traumatize people. And so we need to acknowledge those. We need to understand the cultural frameworks, the elements of individuals and families in which we work with, right? With that focus on humility, that I will never be able to understand everything there is to know. Yet I can be in the framework of learning, right? We need to develop and maintain true partnerships with communities. This is not, I'll use you when I need you for a proposal, right? This is, no. We exist as peers, and the system exists because of what's going on in communities. And so there is this thing that we need to acknowledge about what true relationships mean. And with communities of color, very specifically, institutions of research have come in, they do their research, they leave, and they publish their really nice papers. And the community is left with what? Those are not partnerships. Or organizations who exist within our communities, but people from our communities don't have access to those same institutions, right? And so how do we develop and maintain true partnerships? How do we convey and build trust with people? All of this takes resources, time, commitment, and patience, right? We are where we are today in terms of the HIV epidemic. We are where we are today in terms of substance use disorders and mental health challenges. But that's not what we were years ago, right? And so it takes resources, time, patience, and collaborations. We cannot do this by ourselves. Next slide. And so this is a discussion question, right, for us here. Having heard, my presentation there, and in the time that we have left, we want to bring you into a conversation. But if you can unmute yourself here, how will your practice be impacted by the need to lead with equity? Or how has it changed by the need to lead with equity, right? In my house, we are as healthy as the unhealthiest person in the house. In my house, we are as healthy as the unhealthiest person in the house. Goes a little bit like this. You woke up this morning, you're really happy, you have kids in your house. You're gung-ho, you're going to work, you come to this meeting, all of this stuff that you're doing, and you're really happy. As soon as you walk into your kids' room, they're sick. Where does your happiness go? It goes in the tanker, right? We don't feel as good. We don't feel as motivated. We're worried about who? The unhealthiest person in the house. When that young person, spouse, partner, significant other, whoever that person is, gets better, what happens to us? We get better too, right? This isn't pie, right? That if we give more to this person, then someone else doesn't get that. This is about leading with equity, right? That sort of thing. So I'll take a few comments from people who are willing to unmute yourselves and say something about your practice and what we've talked about thus far. Anybody? I know that was a lot.
Can I ask you a question?
There was the person who started to speak. You had some feedback there.
I just had a question. The difference between recovery capital and recovery equity.
Recovery capital. In terms of recovery capital, it's the internal and external resources and strengths that people bring. So internal recovery capital includes resiliency, my ability to say yes, my ability to say no, my ability to advocate for myself, right? My ability to understand where resources are located. Recovery capital that is internal, or all of those things and then some. External recovery capital are access to healthcare, right? Access to health insurance, knowledge and access to treatment sites and facilities that are of quality, transportation, right? Having healthcare and the ability to access healthcare, right? When we're talking about equity, we are very much talking about how do we create systems that are designed to reach everyone and not just a few, right? And in this country, by and large, Health and Human Services are designed to reach white heterosexual males. Do we have enough services for all white heterosexual males? The answer to that is no. But when we look at marginalized and racialized groups, right, in this country, when we look at issues of gender, sexual orientation, those spaces and places that exist are not designed, by and large, to meet the needs of those folk. And so when we talk about equity in all of its forms, whether that's in HIV or substance use disorders or that sort of thing, is building spaces and places where people see themselves reflected in the services, that they see themselves being treated with dignity and respect, that there's access, but above and beyond access, that there's quality of care. All of those things are grounded in issues of equity, and that we lead with a social justice framework. That is sort of my response to that question. Thank you very much for that.
I always think I'll add a little bit to it when I look at recovery capital, and I think about how we grow a recovery capital, or the ease with which we grow it, or what we manage to hold onto an active addiction. It looks drastically different. For me, I've held on to quite a bit of it. I had a driver's license, I had a car, I had no felonies. And none of those things were about the fact, weren't related to always driving sober or never doing anything illegal or any of that. But a lot of that is related to the color of my skin and the fact that I was never pulled over, that I was never targeted, that I was never searched. And all of those things, right? Not having those things as a part of my life and my active addiction made it far easier for me to begin to grow my recovery capital as I come into recovery. So I think about, right, there's such a lack of equity in the ability to grow recovery capital, and right along with it, in addition to the inequity across our services and our systems, our ability, right, to access that and to grow that is not equal.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Sharon. Other questions, comments? We have enough time to take comments and questions. Go ahead.
And there, I did see a question earlier from Anthony, and it was, what's the distinction between 988 versus Project CARE? And 988, it looks like it begins on July 16th of this year, and it has to do with suicide prevention. So, Anthony, if you'd like to expound on that a little, please feel free to unmute. Ask your question. Is he still on? I'm not sure if he's still on. But if either of you know about 988 versus Project CARE, if you could please let us know. That was his question in the chat earlier.
I do not.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay. There's info here. There's a website in the chat. So anyone interested in learning more about 988, please click on the link that Cindy just shared. Thank you so much. And then Cynthia says a paper was shared about it in this chat earlier. Okay. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Right. You're welcome. We had another question about sort of talking a little bit more about stigma. And Dallas was having some situations there in the community around addressing stigma, or at least facing stigma in their community. Is Dallas still on? Do you want to talk a little bit more?
I see Dallas. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I'm still on. Can everyone hear me?
Yes. There you go.
Yeah, just being faced with a few situations. I run a transitional treatment facility in West Virginia. I also manage peer recovery coaches across the state for our agency. So I'm a relatively busy guy, but at the same time, just trying to balance that with personalities in the community that ultimately kind of target our facility. And my take on it is kind of these individuals that are in our facility are ultimately individuals that are a part of their own community. It's your community members. Though they're in active addiction and getting help and recovery for it, they're still a part of your community. And to kind of target us and them with kind of negative press, it's been a little bit troubling. We've had news crews here kind of filming the facility just based off complaints from the neighbors and various individuals where our facility is located. Figuring out ways to kind of combat that, kind of rein in the stigma, and what we can do to kind of change the narrative surrounding the facility.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Dallas. That's the experience of many spaces and places across the country, right? The stigma is connected to discrimination, is connected to ignorance, and ignorance being people don't know what they don't know, right? And the other thing is that in this country, policies drive stigma. Our policy around substance use disorders, by and large, has been incarceration. And so that sends a signal out to everybody that drug use is a matter of willpower. And if you want to stop, you can stop at any time. And there's a lack of understanding of addiction as a disease and recovery processes. So I'll ground my response in sort of that policy, or those policies that have been going on for a very long time, and that very punitive and criminal justice response. In the spaces and places where I have worked, and I'll give you one of the most whitest places in Massachusetts, that's Cape Cod. Cape Cod is one of the most, right, affluent and whitest spaces. Hyannis, where the Kennedy compound, very specifically, right?
Yeah.
So we were working to put a recovery support center in Hyannis on Main Street, because we wanted it on Main Street for a reason.
Right.
The business community, the neighborhoods, no one wanted it. The press, everyone came in, right, with that level of attitude. What the folks, what I can tell you from the folks is, and I'm sure that you're doing this, Dallas, and your team is doing this, our work is about relationships. So, you know, it's about relationships. So our folk on the ground began to go to those neighborhood association meetings, to have a presence, just to be there, to sit, to learn, to bring some stuff in, not necessarily to talk, but to learn and to say, we're part of this community too. They began to go to the business association meetings, you know, that sort of thing. And when they were asked through media about addiction, recovery, and those sorts of things, they led with experiences about, this is what research says, this is what the data says, but also this is what our neighbors are saying, and people are dying left and right. And we are here as a part of the solution. And so through the development of those relationships and telling stories of lived experience and saying, yes, I lived in that space, right, of being incarcerated and using substances, but today, here's who I am. Here's what I bring, right? Here's what my community brings. And we are here to make this neighborhood safer. We are here to make our community healthier and to lead with those things, right? And the naysayers will be the naysayers. Fast forward to today, that recovery support center is on Main Street. They just got an expansion of the site, and the neighborhood folk and the business community says, no, we need them here, because they have helped us to deal with issues of homelessness, with issues of people using. They participate in street cleanup. They are a part of the community. That, more than anything else, relationships changes hearts and minds, and lived stories and lived experiences changes that. And I'm sure, Dallas, that you and your team, once again, are doing variations of that, as well as everyone else across the country. We are 23 million people strong in the US who identify as being in recovery. We are changing the conversation. We are changing practices, right? And people are continue to die left and right, right? And so we have a responsibility to lead with that. I hope that what I said is of use. I'm sure Sharon might have something to add here.
I think just a couple things I thought of that we had done. I worked actually really early in my own recovery, managed recovery housing, managed 3 residences in St. Paul, Minnesota. And one of the things that we were really, really thoughtful around was about how we could be a good neighbor. And the thing that was the biggest thing was parking. Of every single thing that we might do, because we had a lot of, 9 people in one house, and maybe, half of them had a car and a driver's license, but that we got very deliberate about making sure that we left the spaces in front of our neighbors' homes open. We just did not park in them. We did not ever park in them. But other things that we would make sure that we did is if we had neighbors that were senior citizens, that folks would be of service to them, to mow the grass or carry a package. But again, those were it goes right back to what Hanir said, though, around building relationships and really thinking about what are all the different ways that we're able to do that, so that folks get to know us and to see us and not just see our disease.
Mm-hmm. And people were shoveling snow. They still are. They shovel the snow of the neighbor, and the neighbor now says, "Oh man," right? So you do something that, right, of value. So thank you for that. I want to address something that Hannah asked in the chat, right? How do we introduce these concepts to folks in state government, particularly? And she's from Vermont. She's talking about Vermont being not a diverse state. I think it's the whitest state in the country, right? That sort of thing. When we think about diversity and inclusion, what comes to mind for many people is race and ethnicity, language, right? Those sorts of things. There's a lot of diversity, even in white states, right? When we think about, for example, poverty and where poverty is located. And when we think about the state of Vermont and many other states that are rural, right? Or that you live in a border town, those sorts of things. And we think about the number of resources that are available and who has access to them. We see diversity in many different ways, right? It's not just race, ethnicity, those pieces are extremely important, but we're also talking about gender. We're talking about sexual orientation. We're talking about age, right? We're talking about socioeconomic status. We're talking about those things. And in some places and spaces, we need to utilize that definition to get in on a conversation of issues of equity, right? And I would also say, living in New England, I know this, right? That the demographics in the country are changing rapidly, whether we like it or not. They are, right? They're changing rapidly. And in the New England states, where they didn't have a lot of diversity, we're now seeing more diversity by way of race and ethnicity, very specifically because of work and work from the migrant community who come here, right, to work. And as soon as they have one or two kids, they're not going anywhere. And their kids are not going anywhere. They're in the school system, right? That sort of thing. And so it's having those types of conversations, I think, that can gain access. But also lead with data. The data speaks for itself around issues of disparities. And we have a lot of data on disparities, right? If we look at who has access, quality of care, outcomes, and who is experiencing greater burden of disease, and always look for a champion. A champion. I can speak to my peers and my peers will listen to me. When I'm speaking to PhDs, you better understand that I'm bringing out my PhD. But when I speak with police officers, I have a friend of mine who's a cop. He's better at it than I am, right? Because they just listen to him more. And so utilize the voices that you have, right? Select champions and champions from within. And there are politicians who are champions also for these causes, right? When we tap into them, we equip them with the language, data, and resources, and we talk the language of we are registered to vote, right? Then we gain more access. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for the answer. We have gone the avenue of other like subgroups, and but we have a large amount of people coming from other countries, and that whole population is being completely ignored, and they're the ones that we need to shed so much love on. So that's where my question was, like, how do I take it to the next level? So I really appreciate that. And the data, I'm going to contact you all for data because we need to help these folks. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for all of that you're doing on the ground, everybody else. And this is yet another call for you to understand that our center exists for a reason. We have information, resources, right? Dollars to be able to provide technical assistance, training, support, whatever it is that you need to move the agenda forward. And we have those 4 areas that we work on, right? Priority areas that we work on. All of those are areas that we understand that come with resources for you and the communities in which you work in.
Thank you all so very much, Hanir and Sharon. Beautiful work. Thank you so much. Great presentations. And you all are doing such amazing work. Thank you all for sharing. I've taken away so much and heard so much from you all around compassion, efficacy, taking strength-based approaches, being light carriers and breaking through stigma, providing safe spaces. You all are doing amazing work around the nation, and we appreciate you. And like Hanir just said, please feel free to access our services. You all can request individual technical assistance for your organizations, and you will get these slides and everything in the near future, and they'll have all the links and information that you need throughout them. So if you have any questions, please reach out. And thank you all very, very much for your time and attention.
Those TA services are covered through your tax dollars. So there's not an additional cost to your organization for those. So anybody who's paying taxes who's like, I don't like where it goes, think about centers such as ours and get something back for your effort.
Please.
Have a good rest of the day, good people.
Thank you,
very
everyone.
much.
Thank you. Amazing. Thank you. Great work, everybody.